So the only thing left to do now is add our chats that we create to the sidebar here so we know what chats are open. So going back into our code, all we need to do is close everything off in here, and then on our sidebar, so in the module of the sidebar, what I'm going to do is before I map through the users that we are fetching from the API, I'm going to, in the same section, render a component in here called Firestore Chats. And now we just need to create this component. So if I create this component in the sidebar in here, and it's going to be a new file called firestore.chats.tsx, and it's going to be RAFCE, and then again, this is a react.fc. And in here, what I want to do is fetch all of the chats in real time. So instead of getting a single chat, we want to get all of the chats. So what I'm going to do is fetch it with a use effect with the onSnapshot method. So like we have done previously, what I'm just going to do is copy this and paste it in because we've done this previously. So what I'll do is I'll run through it with you now. But essentially what we want to do is we want to fetch all the chats in real time with use effect. And on Snapshot, we get access to the chats collection, and then we map through each doc, and then we get the get snapshot doc, which is the helper function that we created before, which essentially is an object that has the ID of doc.id and spreads the doc.data. So that is in the user controller file. And then essentially we would get the message list and set it to the chats in here. So now we have access to the chats, which is all of the chats. So the caveat with the chats is you will get chats that you are not included in. So we need to filter them out as well. So we can do that in the UI. So let's go ahead and do that. So in here, what I want to do is first of all, check if chat is true. So you do a double bang in here, and then we want to do and chats dot map. So an optional chain dot map. But before we map, actually, we need to filter. So let's filter first of all. And what we want to filter is for each chat, and the chat can be any for now, but we'll define the chat and fix that in a moment. So for each chat, which is essentially going to be the document data coming from Firebase, actually, we want to check to see if the chat dot messages. So now we're going through the objects and then accessing the messages. So chat dot messages dot message, which is the array dot sum. So now we're accessing the sum method. So if we hover over sum method, essentially it'll return a truthy value if some of the items, or at least one of the conditions, is true. So dot sum, and for each item in here, what I want to do is, again, this is going to be an item. I'm going to put in any for now, but we can define the type in a moment. So for each item in here, if the item message sender ID is equal to the auth.current-user.uid, or essentially the same condition, but what we now need to do is check for the message recipient ID, and then we also import this auth from here. Then we want to map over it. So let me just save this for now and go through it one more time. So we get access to the chats, then we go into the message array, and if any of the items meet these conditions, so if essentially the UID is equal to either the message sender ID or the recipient ID, then it's true. Then we can filter and map the rest of the chats in here. So what I can do now is do a dot map, and for each chat, which is essentially the document data, I want to implicitly return once again and add the closing parentheses also. And all I need to do now, because we've created a reusable chat component, which is what we did at the start of the build, we need to just pass in the chat, which is the key. And the key this time is going to be the index, which I will get access to. And then also the chat data we need to pass in is equal to the chat that we have here. So let's pass that in as well. And then the second argument of the map function is the index. So we can get that, which is essentially a number. So now we just need to close this off and import the chat component. And now if I save all, we now need to reconfigure the chat component. But first of all, what I want to do is declare this type in here. So this type is going to be called the chat message type. So let's go into the type.d.ts file, and I'm going to create the chat message type, which is essentially, I'll bring in the code now for the type, and essentially it's the message body created at message sender message sender ID, recipient and photo URL and type. So let's go ahead and again paste in the chat message type as the item in here. So now all we need to do is we need to receive chat data as props in the chat component. So let's go into the chat component, and in here we just need to receive the chat data. So now either data or chat data is optional because we are handling two sets of data. All I want to do now is handle the different UIs. So if I go into here, and first thing I want to do is console.log the chat data that we're receiving just to see what that returns. And then if I save all, we have some errors on the chat sidebar, which is essentially we need to import the Firestore chats now. So that should fix that. And then in the chat component here, we have an error on source, which is type of undefined is not assignable to string. So we'll deal with that in a moment. But first of all, what I want to do is check the chat data. And now if you go into the Firestore chat, we need to add the use client in here. And the reason we need the use client is because we've added this use effect in here. So essentially, if we use React hooks, it's a client component then. So let's go into the browser now. And as you can see in the browser, a message is being added in here, and that's coming from the Firestore chat. So we just need to handle the image, the message, and the timing here. So let's go ahead and handle that. So if I go into the chat, and in here, what we need to do is, because we're getting chat data, we need to handle, if it is chat data, then we need to render a certain image. And if it is the data, then we need to handle that as well. So what I'm going to do now is create a piece of state in here. So const of info and set info is equal to react.useState of an empty array. And then this array will be of type document data, and that's coming from Firebase. So now what we need to do is handle the chat data now. Whenever chat data comes in, we need to do something different and then render the UI. So what I'm going to do is bring in some code. Okay, so essentially what happens is we have a piece of use state which sets the chat info. When the page loads or when the component loads, we have this filter contact function that invokes, and then it has a dot then which returns a response, which then we set to set chat info. And then also we have a dependency in here, which is filter contact. So essentially what we want to do is filter the contact based on the chat info. So similar to how we did it with the header on the main screen header, where we want to get the opposite user's details, we did create this reusable function, which is the handle contact info, passing in the data and then the URL link. So in our case, we could get access to the chat data.link. And this is a memoized function, meaning that it won't re-render when the component mounts again. What we want to do is we want to cache the data and memoize it, and we only want to revalidate the data when the chat data from the props changes. So that makes it more performant in React. And then what we do is we pass that filtered contact in here in the use effect as a dependency. So what I want to do now is just console.log the chat info that we are receiving in here, and it's essentially an object. So if I save all, we should get the chat info for only the chats that I have created as an authenticated user. So only the chats for myself. So in here, I have chat info, and I only have one chat open, which is essentially this one with myself on my other email address here. So again, it reflects that here in the UI. So there's only one chat here. So we just need to conditionally render the relevant information now. And chat info is now an object. So going into here, in source, what we could do is we could have the nullish coalescing operator, which essentially is if the left hand side is true, then it won't go to the right hand side. But if the left hand side is false, it will go to the right hand side. So let me show you in action what that is. So chat info dot photo, that's what we're getting in the object for chat info. And then you can do question mark like so, otherwise it's data.image. So the source is going to be either chat info.photo, so that means if this whole section is true, so if chat data is passed in, then we want to handle all of it in here, and then we want to show chat info.photo. But if chat info or chat data is not passed in as a prop, then we just want to use the data that we receive from the API and render that in here as an image. You can do the same for the alt, but we'll just keep it as the user because that's what the user is. The second part is going to be the p tag. So I'm just going to render the names. Instead of the first name, it's going to be chatinfo.name. Otherwise, if that's not true, then we want to do data.firstname. And then for the text, what I want to do is add a bit of text in here, but again, we want to this time do the nullish coalescing operator. And on the left hand side, we want to access chat data.messages.message.slice. So essentially what we are doing is we're getting the last message in the array, and this is the way to do that, and we want to get the message body for that. Otherwise, we just want to render this is the last message. And then finally, we just want to do the same thing for the time. So if I just paste it in here, we want to get the created at time in here. And what we also want to do is dot seconds. And then we need to wrap this in the format date function in here like so. And what I would suggest is also try to refactor this code so it's more simple and easier to understand, because at the minute it is quite large. It's getting quite large anyway, so I would always encourage to refactor it. So that is all complete. So all I'm going to do is save, and let's see if that works in the browser now. So now, as you can see here, it's all working correctly, and the last message I sent was hi, which is correct. The icon is the same here as it is here. The name is the same as well, and the last message and the time are the exact same as you can see there. So you can handle that UI. You just need to give it just a icon, enough space in between there. But I'm just going to leave it as it is. So all I want to do now is add a link when I click onto there. So if I go into the home page, at the minute, if I click here, nothing is happening. So what I want to do now is go through the chat, but at the minute, when I click on it, nothing happens. So if we go back into our code once again, and in Firestore chats, when I'm mapping through the data, what I could do here is add a link tag. Essentially, it's just wrapping in a link tag from Next.js, and I just need to import this in, and I can delete this key now because the parent is different. The parent is the link. But when I click on it, I want to go to /chat/chat.link, which is essentially the link for the chat ID. So now if I save and go into the browser, what I now want to do is click here, and then I should navigate to /chat/the ID. So let's check if that works. So as you can see, it's navigating there. So now what I can do is I can log in as this user on my browser and add some messages in here, and they should appear on this side here. So let's give it a try. Okay, so now that I've added the messages in here, you can see that the messages are working. So I'm just going to type in further. You can see my messages are on the right, and then the recipient messages are on the left. So that is the messages complete now. We have a full working app in here. So what we're going to do next is look at Firebase storage and see how we can upload images. So when we click here, we want to attach an icon or an image, and then we want to upload it into our storage bucket, and then we should be able to see the image being rendered in the UI as well. So that's what we'll be looking at next.